Hi, it's Dennis Daly. I've had the chance to go overseas a couple of times, not to a lot of countries, but one of my favorite places was Malta. When I was told that I was going to go there at the behest of the Malta Tourist Agency, I had to look on a map and find out where it was. When I arrived and I spent 5 days there, I had a private tour guide, a wonderful, gregarious woman named Tessie Ajus. We went to the capital, the huge city of Valletta, but she told me that wasn't where the government in Malta started.
Before Valletta was built, the Knights settled in Birgu, which is just across where you see that old castle there. Mm-hmm. That's an old castle, a fort, built by the Arabs in the 9th century. So we're going back 1,000, aren't we?
I think the thing that people need to realize about Malta is because of its strategic location in the Mediterranean, and the fact everything was sea traffic back then, anything that went back and forth through the Mediterranean passed by here.
Yes. This is why the Maltese are so good at ship repair and shipbuilding, because since Phoenician times they have had to repair sails and sailing boats and so on. So even now, for example, we've just had the Cunard, the one that crashed in the Suez, come in here for repairs. It's one of our...
That is a large ship. Something else you need immediately here, and before the day is over, I need to buy a pair of sunglasses.
Yes, you do, because the sun is really hot. Actually, there's a very good shop in Republic Street. We can go there. So anyway, now, starting with the breakwater, what you see down there is Fort Ricasoli, the first little peninsula is Fort Ricasoli. And then comes the next one, that is Bigi, or rather used to be Bigi Hospital. In the time of the Knights it was built by one of the bailiffs whose name was Bigi. And he built that palace for himself. It was later taken over by the British and turned into a naval hospital. As a matter of fact, you can see there's a lift at the side so that wounded sailors from the ship would berth alongside. They were taken straight in the lift up straight into the ward. This, as I told you, is the old fort, and beyond it is Birgu, where the Knights first settled. They fought the Great Siege from there, and when they were victorious, they decided they would build an impenetrable city on this peninsula, which was called Mount Shibaras. And then, of course, after the Great Siege, immediately after, they started building Valletta. That is Senglia, which was built later by the Knights. It was named after Grandmaster Le Sengre. Then come the docks. And then comes the Marsa.
You know, architecturally, I have obviously not been overseas before. This is my first trip. Much of what you see, because of the light pinkish, yellowish color, is reminiscent of what I have seen of pictures of Rome. Of course, we're not that far from Italy here. But it's amazing how almost every inch of the peninsula, except for the streets, is so filled with this sturdy stone type of architecture.
Yes. The stone is local. It's Globigerina limestone, the island. We have two main types of stone. It's either coralline limestone, which is a very hard stone, or the soft stone, which is Globigerina limestone. It's a sedimentary stone. I'll show you when we go to the quarries. I'll show you where it all comes from.
Okay.
So that gives it the color. When it's first quarried, it's white. Then it turns this sort of golden color.
Looks gorgeous at sunset.
It does.
Yes.
It does. It fits in nicely with the. And as for the architecture, of course, it's all contemporary with what the Knights came from in the 16th century.
It might be best at this point that we talk a little bit more about the role of the Knights in the island nation of Malta. They were not just pillagers and soldiers who came to Malta, or they would not have left the heritage of splendid, magnificent cathedrals and churches and buildings. Tessie Ajus continues her story and gives us a little bit more insight into just who the Knights of Malta were.
They came from the noble families. The order of the Knights was a noble. Apart from being a religious order, it also they all had to be of noble birth. So they came from all the noble families in Europe, Germany, Italy, and they brought the best with them. And so this is why all these buildings have this sort of Baroque. Valletta, for example, is a Baroque city. All the buildings, the churches are in Baroque style.
We're going underground to the catacombs of St. Paul.
They were founded approximately about the 5th, 6th century. They were Christian, but that doesn't mean to say that they didn't allow the Jews to be buried, because even Jews were buried down here. Now, the catacombs are here. Actually, they're not the only catacombs. This area is riddled with catacombs, even under the private houses, because this is where the city walls used to end, and the Romans used to bury their dead beyond the city walls.
Well, you know, when most people think of the word catacombs, they think of Rome, and they think of the place where Christianity was practiced in secret, in hiding. It was their only refuge.
Yes. Actually, the catacombs were introduced by the Jews from Palestine when they went to Rome. One advantage we have here in these catacombs are these two round tables you see here. They are called agape tables, and you see them in Malta, but you don't find them in the catacombs in Rome, although you see them in paintings in Rome. What was the purpose of these tables? Well, now, when someone used to die, they used to bring them down here after having anointed them and so on, washed them and anointed them, and they used to wait until the men dug the holes according to size, either in the wall or tombs. Now, there are 3 different types of tombs, which we speak about later. But after having buried the dead, they used to have a wake. And then so they used to put the food on the round table, and they used to lie Roman style whilst they had their meal.
I should point out, because this is radio, it is a platform, a round rock, maybe 4 feet in diameter, but it doesn't sit up from the ground completely separated all around. There is a slope that goes down on about 3 sides of it, and that would be where people would recline?
Yes, and the indentation in the center is so that the maidservant could reach the other side to hand off for the food.
Everything with a purpose.
Everything with a purpose, yes.
So all of these carved niches we see here would have been burial places.
Yes, especially the children. The children had little sort of holes dug in the walls. There was a high mortality rate amongst children, of course, in those days, and so they used to bring them down here and dig the holes according to size, and then they used to be covered. Mind you, the catacombs didn't even look like this. They were plastered over, they were all covered in white. They even had frescoes with emblems, because some of the tombs used to belong not only to people who could afford to have their own, but also to guilds. If you were poor, you joined a guild.
This week on American Montage, we're visiting Malta. We're underground, and our special guide is Tessia Juice, showing us through the catacombs of St. Paul.
You see, this is a saddle-backed canopied tomb. And when the Saracens came to Malta, they pillaged the tombs, and then they filled them in with soil. They wanted to eliminate this Christian attitude that they had, you see, and so they knew that they buried them, usually with a bit of jewelry and so on, as this was just a temporary abode, you see, they thought at the time. So they tried. They didn't realize that the dead came in from that end, so they went to an awful lot of trouble breaking the rock here, when all they needed to do was chip the slab at the side, you see, the mortar around the slab.
I see.
I'll show you where they used to put them in from.
Oh, okay.
You see?
Certainly, it's just an opening as it would an oven almost.
Yes, exactly. They would have a slab here that just was plastered. So once you had sort of chipped the plaster, the thing came out and the dead went in.
Now, was there such a thing as a coffin, or were the bodies just wrapped?
No, the bodies were just wrapped.
Anointed and wrapped and then placed in the tomb?
Yes, they were wrapped in linen cloths and with...
Maybe a difficult thing to bring up, but what about decomposition and everything? I can't imagine it being a very pleasant place down here.
But the funny thing is, it never was smelly, because this would be blocked.
Okay.
This would be blocked.
And they use fairly strong anointing oils.
They use very strong anointing oils, and also there seems to have been a ventilation. It's never stuffy down here.
And cool, too.
And cool,
yes. And in the... It's kind of morbid to say this, but in modern day morgues, they're refrigerated. So we have a situation that's not conducive to terrible things happening.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, do we make a U-turn, or can we get...
We can go the other way, yes, but I mean it all leads the same way eventually. I want to show you the other part, because in some areas there is different levels. It's not all on the same level. I'll show it to you.
You know, if this were in the United States, they would use this for what we call Halloween, which is...
Yes.
Our tour guide, Jessie Ajus, has been taking us around Malta, where all the buildings are made of stone and the history goes back thousands and thousands of years. She wanted to take me to the classic city of Mdina. There's no vowel in that first syllable, it's just M-D-I-N-A. It is a closed, walled city with a unique history of its own.
It always was the capital city in olden days, going back to Phoenician times. We have found Phoenician remains in Mdina. Then in Roman times, there were Roman remains. When the knights came, it of course was already all built up. It's only that the knights found that this wasn't very convenient. As they had a fleet, they wanted to keep an eye on the fleet, and so they couldn't settle in the capital city, which they normally would have done.
Tess, maybe this is a good time to stop here and spend a few minutes talking about the knights. I mean, we've talked around it. You cannot go anywhere on Malta without seeing their influence, without seeing the heritage. If you will, tell us basically when they arrived here and their origins, the fact that they were all very well-educated people with good upbringing.
Yes, the knights came to Malta in 1530 after they were chucked out of Rhodes, Cyprus, Jerusalem, Acre, and they were offered Malta. The knights came from all over Europe. It was an honor. It was considered an honor to belong to the order. It was usually the second son who was made to join the order, because as they were all of noble birth, the eldest son stayed behind to inherit the name, the family name and so on. But the second one was pushed into this religious order.
And originally, if I understand, when they were setting up shop, as it were, more in the Middle East, they were taking care of pilgrims.
Yes. They were originally Knights Hospitallers. This is what they were created for, what the order was created for. And so wherever they went, they had to first of all build a hospital, and they usually took care of the sick, the poor, and so on. It was only later that they had to develop fighting skills in order to defend themselves. As they were chucked out of so many places, they eventually learned, they had a lot of experience in fighting.
Hard to be a pacifist when people keep asking you to leave.
Yes, exactly.
If you would, again, put in perspective about in what era they arrived here, right, in calendar-wise.
Well, they arrived here in 1530, and they left in 1798 when Napoleon took over Malta.
So obviously in modern times they have a tremendous influence, not just time-wise, but the fact that most of the buildings and the great treasures that are here are the result of the knights having owned the islands.
Yes, that is true. Yes, that's precisely so.
Now we're here again, it's Mdina, for the benefit of radio. We're looking at a fortress with the beautiful golden sandstone that looks so gorgeous in the Mediterranean sun here. What are we going to see inside?
Well, inside we're going to see the buildings as they were when the knights came to Malta. Very little has changed. Very few houses have changed. As a matter of fact, you're not allowed to change the houses at all now. There's a law against it. So we should go in, and I'll point them out as we go along. For example, these straight walls you see here are the original walls that the Arabs built. That is the original gateway into Mdina. When Manuel de Villena came to power, he wanted a palace in Mdina. But as I said, Mdina had already been built years before. So what he did was he purchased a house, demolished it, and rebuilt his own palace, which is enormous. And it was so large it came right across the main entrance. No problem. He just blocked the main entrance and moved it.
Moved the front door.
And so having of course created this new gateway into Mdina, he proceeds to put his coat of arms, you see?
Yes.
The quartered coat of arms on the main gate. He had to rebuild the drawbridge and the whole mechanism for the drawbridge leading into the city. Now, on entering this main gate, incidentally, these are said to be the original doors leading into the old city. What we come across is a tower. Now, the reason why this tower is here is that there are 13 other towers like this dotted along the coast, and they were used as watchtowers to keep an eye out for the enemy approaching. What they did, they used to light bonfires on the roof, and they used to get the message here in Nimdina, as it's the highest spot in Malta. They could see these fires on the towers right around the island, and they got the message that the enemy was approaching. It was important that they knew, for the simple reason that they had to prepare for an influx of people all rushing into the main city, which isn't all that large, you see. And so the people not only brought their children with them and their few possessions, but they also brought their animals. They brought their goats so that they could have fresh milk. They brought their chickens so that they had fresh eggs. In every city there was always a reserve of wheat, grain in silos, and water.
You know, this is very reminiscent in a way of anyone who has to go to shelter, whether it be now in Israel or that we hear about during the Blitz in London, where people knew where their shelter was and they took things with them and went there.
And then, of course, they could withstand several months like this. But, of course, when they ran short of water or grain, well, then they killed the goats and they ate them. They killed the chickens and they ate them. And then then they really were in dire straits after that.
We are the guests of some of the warmest people on the planet, the citizens of Malta, that island nation that is just off the coast of Sicily, so close to Italy that it took the heaviest bombing of all during World War II. It is a fortified island nation and most famous, I guess, for the influence of the Knights. They were there for nearly 300 years, and the great concentration of beautiful churches and tapestry and paintings and gold and silver, largely because of the influence of the Knights. We're being taken around the country by a very knowledgeable lady, Tessia Juice, and I wanted to go back to one element of history, and that is what many people think of first when you mention Malta, and that was the shipwreck of St. Paul there.
Well, when St. Paul was shipwrecked off the island of Malta in AD 60, Malta was under Roman domination then, and the governor of Malta was named Publius. And it is said that this is the precise site where his house stood. And Publius had a father who was ill of an incurable disease. This is a legend. And he sent for Paul to see if, as a last resort, he could do anything for his father. And he cured him, and it is said that Publius was converted to Catholicism. Later, he was to become first bishop of Malta. So that is the story. Now, as for the cathedral itself, it has been rebuilt several times, the last time after an earthquake in 1693. The titular painting at the back represents the conversion of St. Paul.
There's a beautiful floating. There's a beautiful floating canopy.
Yes.
I had to look for a second to see what held it up over the main altar.
Yes, yes.
It's incredibly ornate, and unlike the cathedral in Valletta, which has lost a lot of its gold leaf over the years due to weather and atmospheric conditions, this is still very much in pristine shape.
Yes, because this is on higher ground. This is the reason why. The other one has obviously got no damp course, and so the damp is rising in the one Valletta. The two pictures you see on either side of the main altar, they are St. Peter and St. Paul, and they are mosaics. They look like paintings.
From this distance, very much so, yeah.
Yes.
And another great set of organ pipes.
Yes.
You said you went to a wedding here recently. What was that like? It must have been beautiful.
Oh, it was quite beautiful, quite impressive. Yes.
Malta is a nation with a church for every day of the year. It wears its Christian and Catholic heritage splendidly. And if you ever want to go somewhere where you hear bells ringing all the time, it is indeed Malta. But there is another side to Malta, the pre-Christian, pre-Arab, pre-Roman part of Malta. There are ruins of temples that go back 3,000 and 4,000 years before the birth of Christ. Some of the most splendid ancient ruins on the face of the earth are to be found in rural Malta.
and many of them well preserved because of the way they were constructed.
These particular temples are constructed of coralline limestone. As you can see, the rock is very, very hard, so they couldn't really dress it as they do. Although the central passageway was always built of globigerina limestone, because this is a softer stone, and so they could dress it down with obsidian, which is a natural glass that came from the Lipari Islands.
Well, now, before you go any further, you were talking about the age of this, some 5,000 or more years ago. It has always amazed me, whether it's here or Stonehenge, the immensity of these rocks, and we have no idea how they were moved.
No, we still don't know. We do know, though, that they did create rollers, sort of ball bearings made out of the soft rock. I'll show them to you later on. And they used to push and heave these enormous stones on the rock. Now, when it came to lifting the stones up high, say 6 meters high, what they did is that we think, we don't really know, we think they created a ramp and then put the stone on the rollers and pushed them. They didn't actually lift them up, but they actually heaved them and pushed them up.
You can't help but wonder how many accidents and injuries there were. But of course, it was a dedication for them, much as the building of the great cathedrals of Christianity.
Yes, of course. This was the main center of the village, hamlet, what have you. Architects reckon they must have taken at least 40 able men to move some of these stones.
Do we know much about the culture at that time, other than these remnants of temples?
Yes, well, they did worship a deity whom we think was the goddess of fertility. At no time did they offer human sacrifices, because never in any of the temples have we found the remains, the bones of human beings, but a lot of animal bones, starting, say, with pigeons, because these were offerings. So if you couldn't afford a big animal, you offered, say, a pair of doves. Otherwise, you offered a pig or a calf.
Now, behind us, we're standing in what is essentially an oval, somewhat flattened, and then if we walk through an area, we get to an oval that is larger. The walls are higher here. Do we know whether or not in the first temple area we went through that the walls would have also been that high there, or do we assume this being larger, it was just kind of the backdrop?
No. Fortunately, we have found a model, a small model in one of the temples, which gives us an idea of what the roof, or what the final shape of the temples was like, because they're all in this state of ruin, semi-ruin. We do know that the walls were corbelled. They came inwards to sort of try to form a dome. But of course with these stones they couldn't form a dome. So when they got to a certain height, say 6 meters, they would have had tree trunks, wattle, anything to keep the sun and the rain.
Because they would have gotten to the point where they would have fallen in if they had leaned forward much
with an
further.
aperture this size. Yes. And with these uneven rocks, because usually they lock into each other in order to form a dome, don't they? You couldn't dress these rocks in order to make them drop into each other.
Tess, what about the discovery of all of this? Is the archaeological discovery of these ruins fairly new to archaeology?
Yes, maybe the farmers knew that something was there, but they never bothered. It was only in the last century that this particular temple we are standing in was discovered. And then it took such a long time for the government to purchase the land it stood on that 100 years went by.
I would think, too, probably the occupation or the British here had a lot to do with that, because they were very much into archaeology, the discovery of King Tut's tomb. It just seemed to be one of their disciplines.
It was a local archaeologist who did it as a hobby. He was a doctor by profession, Sir Temiz Amit, who actually did most of their field work.
So it took a while for the world archaeological community to realize the value of
it.
Oh,
yes, now we have them coming all the time. Telling us what to do, what not to do. During a storm recently, the big stones got loosened, and so they were afraid they would topple down on the people, so they're going to do something to strengthen them. But they don't really want to do too much, because otherwise they look as if they've been repaired, you see.
There's a large crowd in front of us, so I don't want to barge through here too much.
No, but we'll have to wait here, otherwise the next group will come in.
Now we're in the large one, and there seems to be at one end a much more preserved something, almost looking like walk-in ovens in a way.
Nobody really knows what it is, but the nearest thing they have come to is that it was where they kept the animals till they needed to sacrifice them, you see.
Kind of stalls.
Yes, the central stone isn't original. You see, the top one cracked over the years, and so they had to prop it up with a stone. So that wasn't there originally, but the side ones were, the high ones were. And on this side, you can see a very well-preserved hearth now, where they used to roast the animals. And over here used to stand a plinth with a snake standing on its tail, which in some religions is a sign of fertility. That's to be found in the Archaeology Museum in the Citadel.
Well, a very common carving on Malta is of the goddess of fertility from that era.
Yes, that was found at the Tarshin temple.
Who was a rather plump lady.
Yes, we reverently call her the fat lady.
Not quite a beauty by modern day standards, I'm afraid.
I shouldn't think so.
Tess, this is incredible scenery here. The one thing I haven't asked you yet is, what is it like to live here?
On Gozo?
On Malta in general.
Oh, Malta in general. Well, it's pleasant enough. Life is slower. It's pleasant.
You've spent a lot of years showing people such as myself around. You know where all the nooks and crannies are.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But it's pleasant, provided you get away once a year, as the island is so small. Provided you get away once a year, it's heavenly, I should say.
Now, where do you go on vacation?
Anywhere. Europe, Switzerland, England.
Been to the States?
Yes, once. Only once.
Where'd you go?
Went to the East Coast. New York, Boston, West Virginia. Wheeling was the place.
Wheeling, West Virginia, yes. Before going on the air, we had talked about some of the cities in the U.S. she'd seen.
Yes. Talking about a steel
mills.
Steel mills, yes, and so on. Yes, and then we went up the East Coast to Toronto.
Now, is this the area from where our ferry will leave?
Yes, this is Imjar, and it's the main harbour. And ferries ply backwards and forwards all the time, in the summer even during the night. And the big old building at the top, beyond the harbour, is Fort Chambray. It was built in the time of the knights. As a matter of fact, it's named after a knight who built it, Chambray. It's now going to be turned into a holiday complex, we are told.
Well, Tess, this has been absolutely beautiful, and I want to thank you for taking me around and showing me one of the prettiest places I think I've ever been.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
What a fantastic week in Malta. Old, ancient, thrilling, beautiful, and a story of survival. I'm Dennis Daly.